It's a really interesting panel this morning about innovation in design. And we decided to start with the front yard level, the garden level, move up to the house level, and finally finish on the roof. And of course, these are all applicable to a municipal building, a school. You can extrapolate out. We'll start with Fritz Haig, whose creativity and design you can't help, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about as soon as we meet Fritz. I'd invite you to visit his website soon and have a look at all the creative happenings, not only in his design lab, but in the other initiatives and endeavors too. John McBride heard about Jay Schaefer on NPR about a year ago, and we've been so thrilled, and come to find out Jay was on Oprah, and then Jay was on Fox News just a few nights ago. It turns out conservative Republicans like small houses too, I understand. And then we're also, so we'll hear about Jay's tiny houses, and you just can't even believe that it could be comfortable to inhabit some space this size. And at last, we'll talk with Katrine Schulz-Barth about green roofs. Someone said, "Do you just paint them green?" And I realized it's more than that. So she can tell us about this design too. So Fritz, let's start.
I wanted to tell you about a project I started 2 years ago called Edible Estates. My background is in architecture, but I kind of have a strange practice between a lot of different things, partly which involves practicing as an artist doing museum commissions. So this is contextualized kind of as an art project. That's what it grew out of, and it's developed with art institutions and sponsored by museums as I go. But basically the project is to replace domestic front lawns with edible landscapes and establishing prototype gardens around the country, but also around the world. So just a first definition I wanted to start with that I think about a lot in all the work that I do. Just the definition for ecology, which I think is a word that we throw around so much, but it's nothing more than the relationship between organisms and their environment. That's it. So I guess I wanted to start out with the American dream, and I think the front lawn is so tied to the American dream. And when people think of home or the American dream or their dream house, a lot of times this is the image that pops up in their head. And we've had this same image now for a few hundred years, and it really hasn't changed that much. And usually today it involves, you'll never see anything else around it. It's like it exists in oblivion on its own. You can't see any other structures. And it always is surrounded by this kind of protective lawn. If you go inside the house, you can see again this sense of isolation. Each activity in the house and each person in the house is given their own space. So we've effectively engineered the house to isolate people from each other, activities from each other, and activities can't bleed from one space to another. And if you look at this plan, if you look at most house plans, you'll never see anything beyond these walls because people don't care about it, I guess. You only consider the indoors, and then this outdoor land that you own is something that you just have to manage or deal with or maintain, as we call it. And this idea of this physical land that we own, property owners in America own, as being something that's kind of a burden that you need to maintain, and we call a house on a piece of property legally as an improvement. And if you plant a garden, actually, there's no improved value to that piece of land, actually. We have a problem in LA that if you go on the web, you can look about it, the South Central Farm that was just bulldozed over, like the biggest community garden in LA, which was removed to put in a warehouse. But that garden that families had been growing their food on for a few decades had no value as a garden. Anyway, so here we can see from above pretty much any new housing development anywhere in the world today. And similarly, this notion of isolation and separation, which is happening not just between the bedroom and the kitchen or between people in the house, but also from house to house, and then also from where you live to where you eat to where you work to where your food is grown. And these things are, obviously we've seen with all the talks, these are expansive things. So your food is coming from the other side of the planet now. You're working on the other side of the city. So a lot of the notions of this project came out of this idea of trying to do a small gesture, some sort of provocative gesture that could, as a modest a modest gesture whose goal would be to start knitting these things back together. So anyway, this is the piece of land that I targeted, which is very specific. It's the front lawn, which on the surface seems quite appealing to most Americans. I think we take it for granted. We don't think about it because we see it everywhere. But the more you think about it, the more disturbing and unsettling and dark and sinister it really becomes, because not only is it a space that we dump water on, which in Southern California is a problem, rare fresh water on this crop that then we have to mow, that pollutes the air, and then dump chemicals on it that goes into our rainwater. And but also it's an extremely hostile, antisocial space in which nobody is welcome. The owners in the house are not welcome to spend time here. The people on the street know that as soon as they step on the grass that they've violated some sort of private property here. And even bay windows, which I see as being these prison surveillance windows, so you can make sure that nobody's stepping on your lawn. So when you think about this land that we've already occupied in our cities and the way we're going to choose to use it now, I think we have to target the front lawn and reconsider the possibilities of what can happen here, because it's land that we've claimed, that we have. And this is an amazing sign that I saw doing the last Edible Estates in New Jersey last weekend. I saw this in front of a house in Maplewood, a very progressive town in Maplewood. In the window was an Amnesty International sign, very, very big. And then in the front, they had their pesticide-treated lawn sign. So even the supposedly most progressive people in our society still don't seem to see a problem with pouring chemicals on a surface in front of their house that potentially children and dogs can hang out on. And the lawn has different, in Southern California where I am, I think a lot of the project grew out of the absurdity of seeing that on display every single day in LA. I grew up in Minneapolis where I mowed the lawn every weekend, and depending on the climate, it makes more or less sense. And obviously then you can think about global food production and the statistic that was given out yesterday too, that the average produce on the dinner plate travels 1,500 miles to get to you. That one statistic, then embedded within that one statistics are all of these other notions of what is the quality of this food that's been engineered specifically for 1,500 miles of travel. What are the energy costs of moving that food, plus just the physical distance. Also in New Jersey last weekend, I had this front lawn tour of the most phenomenal front lawns I've ever seen. And I'm like the connoisseur of the front lawn now, so I saw this one here, and I just was like, wow, this is the best front lawn ever. That's like full-on potential farm there or something. And this is something you see all the time in LA. Okay. This is something you see all the time in LA, which is people on their property with a hose. And it's almost like if you landed on our planet and just saw this everywhere in the city of LA where you knew we had almost no fresh water, you would just be like, what the hell is going on in this city? Like, people are out there with their hoses, kind of like zombies, like watering this crop that never goes anywhere, that, it's just crazy. So here again is what most people supposedly want, or is it just what we give them? Now, the lawn, as we know it today in America, really only goes back 50 years to these housing developments in the 50s after the war. And in Levittown and in Lakewood, like I'll show you, these are communities that were built in just a few years, cities built in just a few years. So these places that were level to the ground, all trees, all plants, everything eradicated and removed, and then these lawns that were laid down as these quick ways to cover it up. If we go back further, we go to the Victory Gardens. In World War I and World War II, the federal government had a very sophisticated propaganda campaign to encourage Americans to grow their own food on their property because all the farmers were away. And you had, for example, in Britain, this phenomenal picture of a bomb crater that was used to grow food in. It's like the most vivid example of what happens in war when simultaneously you have a city under attack, but at the same time needing to support itself somehow. So anyway, at this time, this is the last time in the United States that people were connected to how their food grew. At the end of the war, you had almost 80% of Americans growing some amount of food on their own property. That collapsed almost immediately after the war, and Levittown and Lakewood and communities like that were built. So it's our grandparents that hold this last bit of information about how to grow food that we've lost, really. If you go back further, of course, you go to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. And I think this is a wonderful example, kind of the ultimate example, precedent of the American notion of home. And I think it started an important precedent, an important model of what we all strive for. And he, of course, architecturally was having a nod back to the origins of democracy, so it was referential to some previous architectural form. And also the lawn, which was borrowed from England. But also, I think more important, we know he was a brilliant farmer and gardener and he loved his plants. However, look at where they were. They were hidden behind trees in a grid, hidden from view. Something very pragmatic, almost industrial, you could say, that was not meant to be seen or enjoyed as a pleasure garden like you would a French kitchen garden. This was work, this was business, and this was something that was not meant to be viewed from the house, the same way the kitchen wasn't meant to be viewed. And you have to wonder, how would the United States of America or the world be different today if he had decided to plant his food right here, in front of the house instead of over here? And of course, the origin of the lawn, you have to go back to English manor houses, where these lords would demonstrate their vast wealth by taking otherwise very, very valuable farmland and using it to have grazing animals and this ornamental lawn to show how kind of wealthy they were, really. And hiding the vegetable production from view, which is really that first moment of saying, like, plants that produce food are ugly and not to be seen, and these kind of sterile, repressive plants are beautiful and meant to be enjoyed. And there's no reason that should be. We see wonderful precedents all the way before that of pleasure gardens that are ornamental and productive, where you have an intense, profound connection with your food and where it comes from. So then we leap forward today, hundreds of years later, and what do we have? We've gone nowhere. It's like the same crap, really. So you have this in New Jersey, again, I just was on this front yard tour there. So I was kind of amazed at how similar this was to that previous picture. Anyway, so this is the conventional American street, and you can see any movie about any quaint American town, and this image is supposed to evoke in us all the warmest feelings of what it means to be an American and what it means to live in a friendly small town. And yet, I think if you look, like I was saying before, at the byproducts of a life like this, it's actually quite dark and sinister, let's say. So the Edible Estates project really didn't start from gardens or food for me. I was away on a 2-month residency in Australia during the elections 2 years ago, and I meant to have that time as a period to reflect on what I wanted to do next with my work, and I kind of just let myself open to whatever, I don't know. Anyway, I came back without any thought at all about what I wanted to do, but the elections had just happened, and this map was haunting me, because I was, first of all, devastated, but also really puzzled and just alarmed, really, at what we were told was the state of affairs in America, where we had this kind of split. So I grew up in Minneapolis, I studied in Pennsylvania, lived in Connecticut, New York, and now LA, and so I somehow managed to avoid entirely living in any of these places. And I felt so profoundly disturbed that the communities of contemporary art and design of which I'm a part has no desire to engage any of the rest of this part of the country in a dialogue, or to make work that's for them, or, like the most creative people in our country somehow don't see it as their audience, in a way. And I became, the only sense that I had coming back from this trip was how small the little art and design worlds I was in, and how it's almost like this hermetically sealed conversation that was within itself. And I think today, more than ever, the most creative people in our society have, not only do they need to, I think they almost have the responsibility to take on big issues and take on big audiences. And I think that was the only thought I had, how the hell am I going to do that? I just knew that that's something that I wanted. So anyway, when I came back to LA, my only thought that came to me was to do something symbolically in the geographic center of the country, which is Kansas. And I just told everyone I knew for months that I'm going to do something in Kansas. I don't know what, but I feel like I need to do something there as a symbolic act. And I thought of having a happening where we would stage the pioneers moving across the country and making sod houses, or I don't know what. But what happened was a curator invited me to do a project there in Salina, Kansas, which is the geographic center of the country, they have a wonderful art center called the Salina Art Center that sponsored the project. And then the Land Institute was there, and of course, Wes Jackson we'll be hearing from later. So it was this kind of perfect place to start this project, star-crossed in a way. So the notion was to have 9 regional prototype gardens across the country, where I would find families in each of those towns, remove their front lawn, and plant a garden in each one that was responsive to their home, their street, their family. The first one was in Kansas, so I wanted to think at least a little bit about the prairie and the quality of that, and think about what happens to grow there already. And then this is the house that was selected, which is Stan and Preeti Cox. He's actually a plant biologist at the Land Institute, and his wife Preeti is an artist. So I love this house because it's so iconically American and so simple in a way. And I want to be very strategic about the houses and the neighborhoods that I do these gardens in, that they're these provocative gestures. Anyway, so here's the house, and then it actually coincidentally was 4th of July, but I kind of love the symbolism of that as well. And 4th of July weekend, we spent 3 days removing their front lawn, planting a garden. And in this case, I worked with them to create a design and planting list. So I had this kind of recessed area for seating surrounded by fruit trees, and then a mound that would be planted with other things. The kids, what I've learned more than anything after doing this project in 2 years is that adults can be suspicious, but kids are never suspicious about this. These are always the first people out the door racing over to see what the hell is going on and wanting to be a part of it, and you have to fend them off really, because they just want so desperately to be a part of it. Always, everywhere I go, it's always the case. So within a month, because we stupidly planted in the middle of July, which is the worst time, you couldn't actually even see the house anymore after a month and a half. This is a wall of okra. We planted strawberries around the perimeter for the children. Here's the enclosed seating area that over time will develop with time around it. And then also part of the project is making these brochures that are handed out for free so people are informed about what the project is and why we're doing it. So another big part of the project, obviously, is what happens when you're growing food in your front yard. You're in your front yard, and you're out there every day. So suddenly, you're in touch with all your neighbors in a way that you weren't previously. And even if people hate the garden at first or are threatened by it, you're in their face. You're seeing them all the time, and you're growing food, and they're probably going to get a lot of that food because you can't eat it all. So here's this time lapse. We have the families photograph the garden from the same point of view every week, so we have this kind of time lapse that happens. And I think through the seasons, as you see the garden change and even go into winter, you can see what happens. In a lawn, it's the same year round, really, even if it's covered by snow. Maybe it goes brown and green. But with the garden, things are constantly coming up and down, and you know the season even to the day just by looking at what's happening in your garden. And then here's the brochure that we hand out. And then at the end of every, usually I want to plant in the spring and then have an exhibition in the fall where the project is told publicly. So we'll have a video that I produce and a little reading library and the brochures that are handed out. The next garden was in Los Angeles, and I spent 7 months trying to find this family because it has to be the perfect family on the perfect endless lawn street with good sun exposure, and the family has to be really expert gardeners and good spokespeople, good writers. So I found the perfect family there. They lived in this wonderful house in Lakewood with the empty front lawn. They already had a blog about their backyard garden, charting egg production of their chickens and all this stuff. So I knew that they would want to tell the story of their garden. But also they had 2 children, and they lived on this really common street in Lakewood. And Lakewood was a city created entirely in 3 years after the war. So it's really the birth of the American front lawn, and I like the idea of going back there to do this project. And they had these 2 girls, and I think they're the ones who got their father interested in gardening to begin with. He's a computer programmer, and he started to get really obsessed with gardening a few years ago, I think after being in front of the computer all day. So again, over a 3-day weekend, the project is sponsored by grants or museums or art institutions, and then the labor is usually just volunteers, like friends of mine or the family. So we spent a long weekend planting it. And I'm really keen on having these gardens be very designed, like almost aggressively beautiful in a way. So that in this case, I did these kind of symmetrical spirals, so you would be welcomed off the street to walk into it and into these 2 center spaces. And then right after the planting, you can see, people, to see this go up, if this is the only front yard in the whole city that doesn't have a lawn and they do this, it's like freak show, and you think, what the hell are they doing? It's kind of alarming. But after it grows in, and you see them out there every day planting, it softens, and I think I'm really interested in people being witnesses to food growing, witnessing people gardening. And the goal isn't even to have everyone else in the street do this. The goal is to have this public spectacle and display of you going out your front door and performing for your neighbors in a way. And suddenly all those kids in the street too are seeing food grow, and they're like, oh, tomatoes come from plants? And where, what's going on? I don't understand. And the kids suddenly are reminded about the source of what they're eating every day. So I think about it as it's a very public gesture. And when you're gardening in front, you're always much more concerned about what it looks like as well. Then, at the end of every season, we have an exhibition. So in this case, I did these planters, which were around the LA County Fair, and then we brought them into the gallery for the show, and then made this really intense brochure with a planting calendar. I don't know, maybe someone wants to hand these out. I wasn't able to bring enough, but you can pass them around and look at them. But there's a planting calendar for LA in the middle, and then information on composting. All this information that 2 generations ago, everybody knew. And today, nobody knows, really. Most people don't know the basics about even growing food. So a lot of it has to do with just informing people. And then these videos. And if you want to go to the website, edibleestates.org, you can see the videos that have been produced for the project that are all up there in small form or whatever. And then there's this ephemera, like portraits of the gardens. So I make these little modest gardens, but then around them is all this material, like writing about it, taking pictures of it. It just becomes this focus of all this attention and activity. And then there's the reading room that's usually set up so people can read about gardening in that climate. The most recent garden I planted was last weekend in New Jersey, in Maplewood. I had a family lined up in the New York area in Queens, this Indian family, which I was really excited about, but the father, I got a call, well, I'll show you when I was in London planting the other garden recently, I got an email from them saying they backed out all of a sudden because the father couldn't deal with removing the front lawn. She couldn't convince him because he said having a front lawn was like not wearing a tie. So anyway, I found this family in New Jersey, and last weekend we'd planted this. In this case, we turned over all the sod and then tilled it up and added all these amendments. And again, this house I picked because of this very conventional street, and I want these gardens to be provocation. So I get hundreds of emails every month from people like hippies in Portland or in Maine being like, we want to come do your edible estate project here. And that's the last place I want to do it. I want to do these projects in places where they'll have a real effect and they'll start a conversation or elicit some sort of debate within the community, let's say. So in this case, I created 15 raised bed planters in the front on one side, and then the other side was this kind of mini orchard with vines and fruit trees. And then in this case, again, what happened to be the ideal thing to surround it with was strawberries, again, which will eventually spread. And I think it's a very gracious thing to have on the street for kids to pick so that there's something gracious about what happens right on the sidewalk. And then this arbor that will eventually be covered with grapevines. But each one of these raised beds is a different color or a different type of plant. So it becomes very ornamental and on this side, there'd be fruit trees and berries and things like that. And with each garden, I want these prototype gardens to be responsive to the local climate, responsive to the family and what they like to eat. And also, in that way, when all 9 gardens are done around the country, you could look at all of these different ways of doing this. And I think I'm really interested in this idea of a small gesture that has global implications. I think today, when most people feel a little concerned about the direction the world is going, and feeling a little helpless about anything they can actually do, in a capitalist society, private property is one of the few things that we have where we can physically make the world that we want to live on our own property. It's the most powerful gesture you can make with immediacy. So I think today in this conference, we talk about a lot of big global ideas like making a rail system, which I feel completely incapable of taking on myself, or sure, great rail, but I don't know how to do that. So I think what people can think about is what immediately on their own private property tomorrow can you go home and do? And it takes a lot of time. And I hate these books at the bookstore that say gardening for dummies because it's hard and you have to take a long time to learn about it. But I think when people say, well, this takes a long time, I don't think I have enough time to do that, I think we can look at how much time we spend watching TV or how much time we spend shopping and think about, well, how could that time be better spent? So supposedly we've lost all this time. We've gained all this time since our grandparents 2 generations ago because we have all of these wonderful developments in our society that give us free time to shop and watch TV. But you have to wonder, like, how have we squandered that free time? So here's the family. They have a baby Atticus, and I like the idea that he's going to grow up with this garden in front that I'll be eating from. So the last garden I'll show you is from London. This was just last month. This one was commissioned by the Tate Modern in London. And for this one, this was actually for community public housing. They call them estates there. So this is a council estate. They had this vacant piece of green lawn in front of the estate building that was fenced in. No one could go there. So I worked with them to create a design for this. You can see the skyline of London is out here. This is the part of London that has the least amount of green space in the entire city. So the fact that they had a lawn that nobody even went on was kind of crazy, I thought. So I wanted to create something, again, that was extremely evocative and like really pretty, almost. Like I was going to a lot of royal parks when I was there, and I love these curly raised beds that they have around Buckingham Palace, and these very ornate annual flower gardens, flower beds. And I wanted to do something like that for this neighborhood, something that was not utilitarian or productive, but something that was really like beautiful that they would want to connect with and spend time in. So we had about 30 volunteers, and I went back and forth for a while, but I created this design that would enclose also spaces for people, which I think is an important part of these projects too, to create spaces not just to work and grow food, but also to spend time and enjoy it publicly with other people. So this is right after it was planted, and I created like this circle of logs in the center for people to hang out on. These are all the residents that helped build it. And look, it's all the kids front and center. There were 2 adults in the whole building that volunteered that weekend, but almost all the kids did. Like they were all down there every day. And I liked the idea when I left this garden a few weeks ago for the last time, I had this sense like, there's a school across the street too. I just felt like this is the kids' garden, like they're gonna be in charge of this and they're gonna run it, which I think, the kids go up to age 13 or 14 that were out there working, and I think it's totally possible. Here they're having like little children's council meeting. So here it is after a few more weeks. I have a photographer there taking pictures every week, sending them back to me. All these pictures and all these texts, I'm getting texts from all the garden owners, is all going to be published in a book coming out next year in March that tells the story of each one of these gardens from the point of view of the garden owner, along with some essays. So these pictures, let's see, these pictures just came in this last night, actually. This was a garden event they had yesterday in London, and this is what it looks like right now, and everything's filled out like crazy. This is all tomatoes, Laurel Bay. There's some flowers which are edibles. And this space that was once vacant is now this kind of community center where people come and hang out. And also the first concern that everyone had when we went around to do this project was they were really afraid of putting something so vulnerable in the middle of a place that's so hostile, because they were afraid drug users and drunks would come by and vandalize it. But I was very adamant of like finding the most vulnerable public spot in the neighborhood to do this, so that everyone was watching. Every single council estate building faces this green space, so they're all looking at it every day. And even if they're not working in it, they're seeing other people working in it. And they, just through that vicarious connection, are witnesses to the story and feel connected to it in that way. So the future of the project is to, well, I guess I'll just show you. This is the turbine hall at the Tate Modern where the exhibition was. So I have this huge table there now. It's up until the end of August, where people can sit down, read books about gardening in London. The story is told about London on one side and LA on the other, and then this video that we produced. And then you can get a stamp on your hand to give you directions about how to go the 10-minute walk south of the Tate where the garden actually is. So here are the residents actually at the opening. They had never been to the Tate before, even though it's like 10-minute walk away. And now I think they're going every week to check it out and watch the video and stuff. So the next projects I'm doing, one will be in Manhattan at these housing projects in the epicenter of Chelsea art neighborhood, like 10th Avenue and 26th Street is really where the most extreme gentrification is happening in the city right now with the High Line, if you're familiar with that project. So I'm working with the people on the High Line to create an edible garden for a housing project right next to the High Line and right next to Chelsea, next to a children's center for the project where we're going to create this really dense edible garden for the kids to learn. And I'm doing this in collaboration with the British artist Nils Norman, who's really great. And then the next edible estate will actually be in Austin, Texas, which we're planting in March 2008. Thanks. And I guess we have 10 minutes for questions, so if anyone has any. And another question that comes up a lot with doing this project is there's this assumption that I'm some big institution or organization, but it's just me, it's just an artist's art project. And I'm not really qualified to do it because I didn't study horticulture or botany or anything like that. But I think it's important to have a place in our society for people to do things in which they're unqualified, because I think ideas can come from anywhere, and I think it's healthy for people to get outside of the professions, because what happens is in professions is we recycle the same information, and sometimes it's helpful to step outside of your profession, and good things can come of those kind of collaborations, I think, too. Yeah.
I have a question for you. Why is it that you are not planting out between the sidewalk and the street? There's a gal in Denver that's done that, and it's been very, very successful. Springer, you probably read about her.
Well, the project is very strategic. I'm just doing the work where it'll have the most impact. And that strip of land actually isn't owned by the residents. And this project is really about private property and subverting our notion about private property. So I want it to be people on their own private land doing something that has public impact. So by doing it in that strip of land, it's kind of outside the realm of the project. You know, it's totally great to do, but I want it to be totally legal. No, that's not true. I would love to do it in a place where it's illegal to grow food in your front yard and go to jail for that. I think that would be my dream, actually. And there are some neighborhoods where that's the case, and I get emails from places like, I think Sacramento has a law that you can't grow food in your front yard. And obviously housing developments have covenants like that. Yeah.
I love the fact that everything was so open and welcoming. Here, if we tried to do that and not have a fence, we'd have lots of wildlife that comes in and eats everything that's edible, which might be nice too. It's an offering to them. But do you have any suggestions about how to get creatively around that?
Yeah. Well, deer, I'm sure, is a huge problem here, right? For some reason, I haven't come across that yet. Even Salina put up a rabbit fence, but they removed it in a few weeks because it wasn't a problem. But that is an issue. I mean, my big fantasy for the project is that even people who don't want to do this individually could agree on an entire street farming the whole front yards. Like you'd have Eggplant Street and Tomato Road and Zucchini Avenue or whatever. And then you could just put a deer fence around the whole neighborhood. Like instead of these gated communities to keep people out, it would just be to keep deer out, and you would, farm front yards, But I don't know, it would be a little unwieldy to put a deer fence around the front of your property. That sends a weird signal, but I don't know. That's why I'll have to do a project in a situation like that and see what happens.
Hi, I love what you're doing, and thank you. It's very inspirational. I live in the Boston area, and one of the problems we have is pretty much consistently very high lead levels in soil, and I'm guessing in LA it's the same. Did you test? Did the test come out okay? And did you then bring in soil? And then the second question I had, which is pretty simple too, you had different mulches going on there, and why did you choose one mulch over another?
The issue of soil contamination is a huge one, and I think it's part of the project, because if you have found that you cannot grow food in your own city, there's something wrong, and it needs to be fixed. So it's a good moment to have that reckoning and figure out what to do. And I think, I solved it in different ways. In London, actually, that site was totally contaminated. We couldn't grow anything there. So there's a layer of weed, a thick layer of geotex, a few layers of it to prevent roots from growing down, and that's all raised beds. So we're not even growing in that soil. But for the most part, I've tried to choose properties that haven't had an issue with pesticides, so I could get around it. But you can do raised beds. There's kind of forms of remediation you can do depending on what's there. But this isn't a big industrial decision affecting a huge, vast piece of land. It's a momentary project on specific locations that you deal with things as they come up. So I don't know, I could only know when specific things came up and then deal with it at that moment. And I'm not an expert either, I'm just a dumb artist, I don't know. I think there's probably people here at this conference that have a lot more expertise in that kind of thing. And whenever I do these gardens, I want to collaborate with people locally that have that sort of expertise. So I'm just like working like an architect often does, which is connecting people that have expertise and not knowing things, but knowing who does. So, yes.
It's kind of a two-part question. One, have you played around at all with any complementary planting ideas in your gardens? And two, have any of the gardeners that have been caring for the gardens you've done made any connections to the beneficial bugs that come and help the garden be what it needs to be?
Yeah. My basic strategy for planting is to plant everything. To plant is whatever you can get your hands on, to put it all in there. And then the family can see what works and what doesn't. And I think that's how everyone learns how to garden, first of all, is by experience. And I think it's healthy to just see everything out there and growing, see what happens when you plant things next to each other. But they have to have experts they can rely on too. And companion planting is really smart. Like I think in Salina we did 3 sisters, which is zucchini, beans, and corn. For example, the beans grow up the corn, and the zucchini blocks the sun between the corn. So I'm really interested in these being places of experimentation, not precious places to play out facts that have been researched necessarily. They're not supposed to be expert gardens. They're meant to be families on their own, growing their own food, figuring stuff out publicly. Because I think if they're made to be too precious, then it becomes this barrier to other people feeling like they can't do it because they don't have the knowledge. And I think everyone can if they tries. And another issue kind of connected to that is I think the response these gardens have gotten is at first can be quite negative. People are worried about property values, or just any sort of change is threatening to people. But I think as they see them grow, they soften to them, I guess. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you've ever contacted or been contacted by Home and Garden TV or somebody like that. It seems like a good place to get the seed planted, so to speak, in a lot of red states.
I know, it's already like a TV show, isn't it?
Yeah,
Actually, I have a friend who does TV in New York, and we've been meeting with people for a year about doing it. Well, I'm really skeptical about the whole TV thing, but I have a friend who's trying to pursue it, so we've had meetings like that haven't gone anywhere yet. But the project started out with the goal of having a broad audience. This was not meant to be kind of a narrow conceptual project to be enjoyed in a gallery somewhere only for a few. Like, I'm interested in having a wide audience, so I'm not averse to that. And I want to do the book as something that everyone has access to the story and understanding it. Yeah.
I'd like to just pass a tip on. I heard from a peach tree grower in Georgia, to keep the deer out of his plantation, he put an electric fence 10 inches off the ground and kept the deer out. And of course, our deer here in Montana are a little bit bigger than that. They might have to be 12 inches, but something I'd like to try it and see if it works. It might be a pretty inexpensive way to protect it.
That sounds good. Then you have like dogs and children issues, but I don't know.
They learn quick.
I'm looking for some advice on neighborly relations, especially with adults. And one of the, I guess, positive aspects of your projects is you get it done in a few days, a week. Whereas for me, the first action in my yard was to stop watering and pretty much let it go wild and die. And I'm lucky to have a very candid relationship with one neighbor who is very forward about how bad it looks to her. And that's great, because then we can talk and we have a fantastic relationship. Other neighbors kind of walk by and you get the cold shoulder. And neighborly relations are important to me. I don't want to say, oh, you've got a golf course in your front yard, and right. I disapprove of that. No, that's their business. And so I like that you're inspiring people, but for those of us who can't do it in a few days, and frankly for me, I'm just going to let it die, and then I've planted trees, but this is a multi-year process to convert my yard into a edible landscape. If you have any advice in bringing adults in or somehow helping with that neighborly relationship.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a difference between, I guess what I'm interested in with this project is putting a garden in a place that it's threatening to people. So people then have this moment where they check themselves, like, why am I scared of this vegetable garden? Why is it threatening me? Why is it upsetting me? What happens when you put something, I mean, growing your own food is the first thing that I thought we did when we stopped being nomadic and started being a civilization, and yet now it's the furthest thing from what we're capable of, and I'm interested in that moment of recognition where we see how far away we've come from our basic human place, that we are possibly threatened by a vegetable garden. So that's the point of the project. When it comes to the general how people individually tend to maintain their front yards, I think that's at this certain level of expectation about what's meant to be there. And if you're not watering your lawn, then that's an obvious place for people to get upset. Actually, Michael Pollan did this great essay 20 years ago called Why Mow, which we'll be including in the book. And in that, he writes an anecdote from when he was growing up. His father didn't water or mow their front lawn. His neighbors freaked out. They got the official kind of city organization, city council involved or something. I mean, it came really to blows, like nobody in their neighborhood talked to them anymore. And one day he came out with his mower and just mowed his initials in the lawn and went back in, and that was it. And he kind of left it at that. He just didn't deal at all. And I think Michael Pollan wrote very, very eloquently about that experience of living in a household, as a child, where nobody would talk to you because you didn't mow your lawn.
Yes, I wonder if you've given any thought or looked at any of the experiences in the third world in situations which are very land constrained. I've seen situations of very creative food production in very small areas, Bangladesh in particular, three-dimensional. And I understand completely that the aesthetics and the people interactions are important, but I think that kind of looking at some of those experiences might be it could be a very good two-way process.
Yeah, we see it in LA. I mean, LA is a city of people from all over the world, and you see it there all the time. People show up in LA, see how people live, and are like, are you guys crazy? And they go out and they grow their own food. There's Chinese, Korean, Latino populations that for them, this is how you live. This is the most basic kind of normal thing you could possibly do. So they come in, size up LA, and think it's nuts, and of course, start growing their own food. I mean, to them, this project doesn't make any sense, All right, that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. They're saying stop.
Hi, I'm Jay Schaefer, and I live in a tiny house. It's smaller than some people's closets. I've been living in spaces of less than 100 square feet for over 10 years now, and I don't really have any plans to change that in the near future. This is the house I'm living in right now. I want to give you a little tour of that before I say much of anything else. After I give you the tour, I'll start talking about the whys and the hows and all of that, because I do often get the question, why? Why would I live in such a tiny house? And if I forget information in this, please just raise your hand and ask, because there are certain things that I just blow off, assuming everybody knows that, this house, you wouldn't know that this house is 8 feet by 12 feet, for example. It's 100 square feet, and it's on wheels. This is the floor plan. I guess I could start talking about why right away. Why has a lot to do with, or actually, let's talk about how. How is, I live alone. I get most of my aerobic exercise outside. And I use what I call subtractive design to make my houses. I'm actually making other people's houses now too. And by that I just mean, I try to eliminate all of the space that's unusable in a house and just keep around what is usable. So while the houses are a lot smaller, they're really not all that much, there's not all that much less usable space inside. And one thing that surprises people when they come to my place is that although when they get there, they're surprised that it looks even smaller than they thought it would on the outside, the inside feels pretty big. So here's the tour. It's the front porch that you could see in the photograph. And the front door flanked by a couple windows. The main room here is 7 feet by 7 feet with a little desk over to the side. Actually, a pretty big desk for a tiny house. It's about 5 feet long. Maybe, well, actually, I guess that's 7 feet long. And then 1.5 feet deep, little heater. The kitchen, it's a good kitchen, I think, because, well, if you have 2 people there, it's good for just one person, so nobody's going to get in the way of anybody else because you don't have much of an option. And the bathroom is just a wet bath, so it's a waterproof bathroom. The whole bathroom is the shower. We'll go upstairs now. I like to, oftentimes when I'm doing these tours of my house in real life, it doesn't take any more time than it's taking right here. It takes about 90 seconds to go through my house. And I like to refer to things as like the great room or the veranda. Here's the second floor. It's just a little sleeping loft. When I get up there, it's only about this high. It's 3.5 feet. So when I'm sitting up, it's about this tall. If there are 2 people up there in the bed, you've basically got to flip a coin to decide who's going to sit up first in the morning. This is poor man's PowerPoint. You don't actually have to buy the program if you just go into your iPhotos. This is just looking to the left when you get inside my house. Opening the door, actually looking from the door into the main room there. There's the little heater flanked by a couple of chairs. And I have a lot more storage space per square foot than most houses would have because I'm not really ready to relinquish all my stuff yet. I'm not really into the deprivation thing. I really like having my computer, the DVD player that comes with the computer and a stereo and all those fun things. And my wardrobe really isn't all that sparse. It's just that I got rid of everything else that I wasn't using at one point, and this is all I have left. Here's looking right from the front door. There's the desk, and beyond that, you can see into the kitchen. Lots of storage space once again. And in the kitchen, looking to the left into the kitchen, you can see the bathroom back there, the waterproof bathroom, which actually, after an entire year, still is not finished. Just like a lot of people in their self-made houses, I got 95% of the way done and then stopped. And actually, last week I started again, so by the end of next week I should actually have plumbing in my house. Until then, I've been going out to a spigot in this orchard that I've been living in. I probably shouldn't play that up too much because I like people to think or realize that it can be very luxurious living in a small space. And it is because you're not spending as much time earning the money to pay the mortgage or, for that matter, spending as much time to do housework. That's one of my reasons why I like to live in a small space. It's just I really don't enjoy vacuuming as much as a lot of people apparently do. Actually, Fritz's presentation was interesting. Even before you get inside the front door of the average American house, the front lawn, I read this statistic that a 2-cycle lawnmower in 1 hour puts out more greenhouse gases than the average American car going 2,000 miles. So in the average American lawn, before you've even gotten into the house, you've got this enormous amount of waste. And our houses at this point put out more than 18 tons worth of greenhouse gases per year. So that's another reason why I didn't want to build more space than I needed. Beyond that, I should mention that this is all just statistical. So it's probably something that could go in one year and out the other. Just wanted to mention that 7 tons worth of construction waste go into a landfill every year from each American house, average American house. And then there's the whole consumption thing too. The amount of materials that go into it, the fossil fuels for that matter, that go into heating or cooling a place are just ridiculous. Here's the upstairs. Luckily, my choice of lifestyle actually does mesh pretty well with getting this message out about, I hate to call it an anti-McMansion message, any kind of anti-message, but that is what I tend to call it lately. Just the idea that there is some other paradigm out there besides just buying bigger as better. because really bigger is not necessarily better. In fact, when it comes to ecological matters or just economical matters, the matter of doing vacuuming, for example, smaller is definitely, for me, the way to go. There's a picture of the side of the house. Which actually, with the pictures of the wheels there, it brings me to another point. Another reason why I live in a small house is basically civil disobedience. Once I found out that it was illegal to live in a tiny house, I figured I had to get myself one of those things. Not that you could actually go out and buy one very easily these days, but I did go out and buy an Airstream trailer of about the same size, a 14-foot long little silver bubble on wheels. And that was great until about December. And then the insulation on those things just isn't quite enough to take an Iowa winter. I'm now living out in California. But back then I was in Iowa, and I was living on the edge of a hayfield with a solar panel and a well 200 yards away. And that was those were my amenities, basically. And I loved it. It was very simple. But then December did come, and it was not so comfortable anymore. I wound up scraping a lot of the ice off my new wooden walls. I'd taken out all the lime green Formica and orange shag carpeting to put in all wood, and I wound up scraping it all up because you just can't live in those things when it gets below like 10 degrees or so. So there are these codes that say, well, they're minimum size standards. They're part of the uniform building codes and international building codes, and they dictate how small a house you can live in. And it's usually not, so much like you can only live in 300 square feet, but rather it pertains to you have to have a room of 120 square feet, at least one of those minimum, that's habitable. You have to have 7 feet dimensions in each direction for each room. Stairways need to be a certain pitch, that sort of thing. And it all adds up to the point where it's very hard to get a house that's small at all. And in fact, my house is about 1/3 the size of a legal American house. That's part of why I put wheels on it. It's because it's not really a house anymore. It's a travel trailer. And with travel trailers, you don't have to abide by these codes because they're not buildings, and therefore the building codes don't apply to them. DOT regulations would apply to travel trailers and all vehicles. So this is my travel trailer. And it also turned out, I was living in Iowa City at the time, and you couldn't live in a travel trailer on a lot. I just wanted to buy a lot and live in my tiny house in Iowa City, but that wasn't allowed either. But you could actually live or camp out in your own RV in your yard. So I bought a 600 square foot house in Iowa City, put this in the backyard, and then I wound up camping out virtually every night and renting out the 600 square foot house to pay the mortgage off. This is just my first ever attempt at photoshopping. Actually, I didn't know Photoshop at all. This is Iowa, but if anybody who's been to Iowa knows it doesn't look much like this. This is Iowa road and car and house meet the Swiss Alps in a calendar that I found. I glued it to the calendar, actually. I didn't know how to use the Photoshop yet. I want to make sure I cover all the reasons why I moved into that house. I suppose if I've forgotten anything, I will remember it shortly, but mostly just the economical and the environmental reasons that I mentioned already, and then there's that civil disobedience thing too, which is, I'm really happy to say that my efforts are changing things a little bit. Like in my area in California, some of the codes are eroding, and in fact, minimum size standards have been found to be illegal in a lot of areas now. So they're eroding away. Unfortunately, covenants pop up at that point. Local, like little regional neighborhoods will come up with their own minimum size standards and say that we will only have like 3,000 square foot houses in this neighborhood. So that's really a big problem at this point. Public perception of small houses. The perception is that little houses will reduce the price values of neighboring houses, but that's definitely not the case. It hasn't been found to be true at all. It's a really it's a perpetuated myth. The housing industry put out these codes in the first place. They're the ones who pushed for them when profits leveled off back in the 70s and 80s. And And then the banks followed suit by reducing or limiting what kind of house you could get a loan on. You basically have to have a fairly big house to get a loan these days. And the municipalities followed suit, of course, with the codes after that. I put in this picture because I'm really into urban planning as well. I don't really draw a line between the built environments that we have inside our houses and then just outside. It's all part of the same fabric, and it has a lot to do with that line or that spectrum between indoor and outdoor has a lot to do with community, I think. And what we've designed so far for supposed so-called communities is just has not been so good historically in the United States, at least ever since the suburbs started popping up. The average American street is these days, the ones that are put in now are just enormous, and they're unnecessary. I think it was maybe in Jim Kunstler's book that I read that 50-foot wide minimums were put on streets because that's how much space it took for 2 fire engines to pass in opposite directions at 55 miles per hour in a neighborhood. This is back in the Cold War era when we just made everything, not so much for comfort, but for cars and for emergency evacuation. Oh, and there are the McMansions back here. It's funny because I guess I didn't mention one of the other reasons I really built a small house for myself is just aesthetic. I really, I never was trained in architecture, though that's basically what I do now. I went to art school, and I wanted to employ my personal aesthetics, but I really couldn't foresee myself affording a house anytime soon, so that's part of why I set out to design and build a tiny house for myself. I really wanted to make a place in which quality was over quantity, and so that's what I did. I figured I wouldn't set a budget. I would just do what I needed to do because how expensive could 100 square feet be anyway? And I found out that you can actually put a lot of money into 100 square feet if you're not paying attention. But I'm really glad I did because I love it. I wouldn't change anything about it. I guess my house, when it comes to labor and materials, I could break it down really quickly. Materials are only about $15,000 for my house, and then the rest of $40,000 is labor, which if one does it themselves is pretty cheap, really. But I suppose I have the most expensive house per square foot in my area, which is a very expensive area, by the way, in Sonoma County, California, and yet I also have the cheapest house at $40,000. So either way, I figure I win. But this, the quality over quantity thing, when I drive past giant houses with really cheap design and materials, I cringe because I just think, at least you could keep that kind of thing small. If you're gonna use vinyl siding, why use so much of it? Whenever anybody, well, actually, it's very rare that people completely just, at least to my face, say that I'm insane for living in 100 square feet. But when on occasion they do imply that by a raised eyebrow or whatnot, I point to my friend Greg, who about a year after I finished my house came over to document the house with his video camera for his website. He has a website called Resources for Life, and he wanted to have a document of this tiny house that I was living in. And then 2 weeks after he made the documentary, he came back and said, I want a house like yours but smaller. So I built this tiny house for him. It's only 70 square feet rather than 100. And he's been living in this for about 5 years now in Iowa City. He's a techie. He does a lot of computer work for banks, security systems, and for the University of Iowa. He's one of their most valuable employees as far as I'm concerned. But he lives in his dad's backyard in a tiny house. And he's my greatest advertisement for my business. He just can't shut up about how much he loves living in a 70 square foot house. He lost 80 pounds when he moved in. He was almost 300 pounds when he moved in. It's kind of like that Wendy's commercial. I should start marketing that idea. Oh, this is just the first floor plan of Greg's house. It's got a little, there are 4 closets, one in each corner. And then between the closets in the middle, there's a little kitchen area on this side with a sink and a little burner here. And if he wants to put in an oven, though he doesn't seem to want to, he'll probably wind up putting that above the sink. And then there's a refrigerator underneath the whole thing under the cabinet. And his desk is over here. He's like me. He spends a lot of time at his desk in his waking hours. So we put a lot of the space into desk and into sleeping. And there are little planks that fold down from this area and this area so that he can be surrounded by workspace when he wants to really get into it. There's the kitchen of Greg's house, with that plank folded down on one side. The other one's over here, still up. It's kind of competitive. At first, at least, in a way, it was like, mine's smaller between Greg and I. I'm actually thinking of making T-shirts like that. We're trying to do some marketing now for my company. And along those lines, I've been simplifying things a bit. The house I live in now is not the house I built 7 years ago exactly. It looks exactly like the house that I built 7 years ago on the outside, but it's a bit changed on the inside. But in the inner room, about 3 years ago, I decided to sell my house. Somebody offered me some money for my house, and I couldn't refuse. So I sold it to a guy out in New Hampshire and pulled it out there. And then I built myself this is actually 70 square feet. It's a little bit bigger than Greg's house because I filled in the porch area with indoor space. But I lived in this thing for only about a year, and half of it was spent with a girlfriend of mine. And I don't recommend living in 70 square feet necessarily with somebody else, but we'd just moved out to California at that time, and it worked out okay for about 6 months or so. Maybe quite a bit less than that, come to think of it. But and people ask what I would do if I ever got married or wanted to live with a family, and I have a lot of ideas. I mean, I've designed much larger houses that are just maybe 700 square feet, very tiny by American standards, but still bigger than my house. Or I might even just line up a few of these things in a row on a shared porch, which is what that woman and I planned to do. We just never got that point. This is the inside of that house. Looking back at the kitchen, and the desk is right there in the foreground. There's the heater in the background. And since building Greg's house, I figured why not keep going. I've been building tiny houses for other people ever since through my tiny house company. And this is a place we built for a woman who lost her house down on the Gulf Coast to Katrina. She actually owned the oldest house on the Gulf Coast, and it survived every hurricane until Katrina for several hundred years. And so we built this thing for her. She was planning on building them down there at a factory and basically sending me royalties, but we haven't really worked that out at this point. And this is a more recent design, just from a few months ago. These next few slides are just a very recent designs I've come up with. This one's just, I should point out, this house is 8 feet by 16 feet, not including the porch. And then this house is 14 feet by 18 feet, not including the porch. This is actually, I'm trying to get away from this series of houses I did for the last 5 years or so that were considerably bigger than my house. This one is about 350 square feet, I think, if I'm doing the math right in my head. It's got, it's about 10 feet wide by 16 feet deep, and it's got a little loft upstairs. But the problem is with this house and a few of the others I designed, they are too big to qualify as travel trailers because you can't really efficiently put them on wheels. I guess you could, but you'd have to chop off the roof to transport it. So I decided to eliminate these things from the usual product line of our designs and just stick with the ones that are small enough to go on wheels or be called what's known as a building of no consequence. If it's Usually the number is 120 square feet. If you can go for less than 120 square feet, you don't need a building permit. And that's not to say that you can live in such a thing legally, but people do everywhere. And when I approach housing departments about this, because I like to write about the subject a lot, they don't like to talk about it. It's just like, everybody does it illegally, just do it illegally. That's, just leave us alone and let's just not worry about it for now. But I just decided to cut out the middle ground between 120 square feet, and then I jumped up to houses that were actually legal, just like that last one I showed you. This one actually would meet code on the inside for all those uniform building minimum standards. This one is just at 120 square feet again, just like my house. And it is basically the same thing turned sideways. This one's about the same size as that first white one. And this one, I finally, I'm a big fan of modernism. Well, what am I saying? I meant to say I'm not a big fan of modernism. I actually like the look of it just fine. I went to art school, so I like clean lines. I like the aesthetic. But it doesn't really function as architecture as well in most areas, at least not in wet areas or especially snowy areas, because a flat roof just does not shed the elements. And a roof was intended initially, of course, to shed elements. And so you get a lot of leaky roofs in modern houses. And so I really try to stay away from them. But I figured I might as well have a few modern houses for people who live in desert climates or in areas where there is no snow. So I made this one at about 14 by 28 feet. I want to talk more about, I'm really excited. My big thing lately is just expanding beyond the walls of a house. My new business partner, I finally got a business partner who actually understands business. And he told me about this thing called profit. And it's great because I've just barely squeaked by for the last 5 or so years, and he came along and he's helping me out a lot. He works really well with money. So whenever I mention these projects out beyond the realm of an individual house, he kind of cringes a little bit because he wants to stay focused. He's the focused one. I'm the dreamer. But I'm starting to win him over, and so we're hoping to build a community soon of tiny houses. This is a picture of tiny houses out on Martha's Vineyard, Oak Bluffs community. It's been there for a couple hundred years now, and it started out as a Methodist camp. It was actually a bunch of tents. The footprints of the tents were about the same size, about 11 feet by 22 feet. But since then, they've put up wooden walls. Eventually, people who owned the tents decided they wanted to go with something more substantial. And these things were really built not according to code at all. In fact, they were really built just to barely get by. They'd just last a few years. But now they've been around for I don't know, 150 years since the development turned from canvas to wood. And they're doing great. And people live in them year-round, although most of them are still just occupied by summer residents. But I love it as a model. It's got all these tiny houses, small footprints, not much in the way of lawns. A little bit. There is a shared area at the center of the entire thing, so they've got this shared amenity thing going on where, if you want to have a big party, you don't have to worry about doing it in your tiny house, and that can be a problem. I've learned that. It's better to have it outside the house, and in California, that's pretty easy. But out there on Martha's Vineyard and in some other areas now, the idea of, in a lot of other areas, the old co-housing idea is pretty tried and true now. So having small houses with larger shared areas is becoming very popular. And it's in the European models where it's been going on for a long time, they found that consistently people in the end and their post-occupancy surveys say that they'd rather have smaller houses than they have built and a larger communal space. This is another picture of fairly tight housing. Narrow streets, I like that. I'm not, how I feel about the wide streets. And this is in Boston. up on, this is Acorn Street. And of course, row housing is even more efficient than freestanding housing. The reason I focus mostly on freestanding houses myself in design is because Americans do want them. And as long as Americans want them, they will be produced. And there just aren't many freestanding houses out there for single people or even couples. A lot of them are just, most of them these days are really built with a lot of extra space inside that isn't really usable or used. Like I said before about the covenant problem, the public perception of small houses is still, and high density for that matter, of clustering houses together for a more efficient built environment, is still something that a lot of people shirk away from. Because they think of, when they think of high density, they think of tenements back in New York in 18 whatever, and they think of London with the coal dust. But high density can be great. The cottage housing ordinance that started out in the Seattle area is spreading now, and that's just where they take one lot that's intended for maybe one or maybe two houses, and they put 8 small houses on it with little pedestrian walkways and a shared central green and you know, a shared building. But then you've got 8 houses and all this other stuff and parking out back, so you don't have the car thing out front. You know, some of our houses look like they're occupied by cars with the front garages on them rather than by people. Anyway, you've got these great communities going up now. So things are changing, and it's largely just due to education. And this is a picture of my friend Dee Williams, who I sold a set of plans to about 5 years ago. She's up in Washington State, and she's teaching grad students in architecture and elementary school kids, as you can see here, all about the merits of smaller housing and how little people really need to get by with happily. This is actually my favorite picture here. It's kind of a nightmare. If I had this in my house, I'd be kind of freaking out, frankly. But she said she fit 70 people in her house in one day. But I think that she must mean in shifts, because I don't think she could actually get 70 people in 100 square feet. But I think there must be at least 20 in there. And so on that note, I would like to go to questions.
Thanks for that. That was great. Have you ever considered dismantling a larger house and building several small ones out of it?
I'm glad you asked that, because I'm told that in Russia there was this economic boom, and they started going with the American model with the McMansions in the suburbs. And I haven't done that, but I'm told that those McMansions in Russia are being dismantled because they're not really serving anyone anymore. They've become slums, these suburbs, and the McMansions are becoming scrap lumber. So I do like that idea, because where I live, and well, everywhere, but especially in Sonoma County and this kind of green belt up there on the West Coast, recyclable materials are really readily available. So even if I don't dismantle something myself, somebody else already has, and I could go snag those materials and build something from totally reclaimed lumber. I try to focus on the small thing as being, you know, building small is the greenest thing you can do. There really isn't anything else you can do that's greener. There was this era where, you know, people were building 5,000 square foot straw bale homes with reclaimed rafters and bamboo flooring, and calling those 5,000 square foot houses green, and they were just for 2 people. And I think that era is over. I certainly hope so, because at this point it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Building, you know, using these technologies is great, but the first thing we need to consider is just using less of everything. So a lot of my houses are built just from, you know, Home Depot, frankly. We're going more towards local and renewable stuff, but so far we've just been focusing on the small thing. Yeah.
So you were on the Oprah show?
Yeah.
How did that go?
I felt like it went really well. I really, They treat their guests very well. I've never traveled like that before, although I should say you guys have done a good job. But I didn't get a limo here, the big stretch limo. I've never had that. It's just crazy. They put you in a really nice hotel and then drive you to the studio, and they guard Oprah very well. It's like you never actually talk to her until you're on TV, and then you're gone. Oh, right. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, actually, what did she say to Building Small? She actually was very funny about it. It was on the commercial break, so it wasn't on TV, but she said, this is great. I'm going to downsize one of my 5,000 square foot houses. She was totally empathic, and I never would push. I don't like to, when I talk about small houses, this is a good thing to define. I just mean, I like to see all the space being used. So if somebody needs 5,000 square feet, because she probably has a lot more parties than I do, I'm guessing, then I figure, it may be more like a Holiday Inn situation where that space is being used. But yeah, so I can't put anybody in particular down, though I really doubt that virtually every American, well, not every American, but so many people need so much space in this country. It's hard to believe that that's true. Yeah.
Just wondering if you could go into a little detail about the actual construction methodology you're using on the small houses. 2x4 studs, 16-inch centers, and roughly how much does it weigh when you finally get it done?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is something I had to think about a lot before I built the first one, and it really pays to get a trailer that has a high capacity for a lot of weight, just in case. Turns out my house itself weighs about 4,000 or 5,000 pounds. Depending on what kind of lumber. It's like one 2x4 can weigh 10 pounds and another could weigh 5 pounds. So I try to go for the lightest lumber at Home Depot. They'll see me there for 5 hours picking through piles to find the lightest stuff. And I did go with just stick framing. And I kept everything. I just built straight off a flatbed trailer that I bought it off a lot. And I bolted the flooring of the house, the framing of the flooring down to the trailer first. And then just went with standard building. Very vernacular, very common sense building. Yeah.
Could you tell us about power supply, water supply?
Oh yeah.
Sewage, wastewater, those things.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you about that. Sometimes I try to stay away from this subject if it's just in passing. But now that I can explain myself thoroughly, I'll just say that I do have a really primitive system. I want people in the public in general to understand that they could have a standard toilet, they can have a standard electrical system, whatever standard means. They can have whatever they want for utilities in a house. But I go with a composting toilet, and I had solar panels on with my first house off to the side, and I need to get some for the new house now too. But I tend to operate pretty much off-grid. Right now I'm hooked up to my landlord's house with an extension cord, and I'm like 100 feet away from his house in his apple orchard.
How does the yurt fit into your thinking?
The yurt? I don't know enough about yurts to say. I mean, what little I hate to say because I know that there are good yurts out there, but my general feeling about yurts is that in design, round spaces for me work really well with community gathering areas like an auditorium or a church. But then when it comes to fitting in like living, everyday living domestic needs, it's really hard to design in. And then with a lot of yurts, unless they're well insulated in some way, there's a mildew problem. And a lot of my friends out in Sonoma County, where a lot of people have lived in yurts, have had to move out because they become allergic to the mold that's popping up. But I have seen yurts where there's great insulation, and with the right amount of design, you can start squeezing some domestic functions in there too. One more question.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the other things that happen to you as a person when you live in a small house. When I lived in Africa, I was in a little hut that was probably 70 square feet, and I've noticed I spent most of my time outside because my hut had no windows, so I couldn't really see inside to do anything. And also I just couldn't have very much stuff at all, which you talked a little bit about, but I found it to be very positive for me and changed my life, really.
Yeah, it is a big psychological change for the average American to go from the average American house into something that's 70 square feet or 100 square feet, just because you really have to start paying attention to what it is you actually need to be happy in life, and that probably would start out for most of us with a watertight roof and security for the stuff we do have. Some things are fairly universal, and then some things are less universal, more personal. So just learning what it took for me to be happy was very important, and that was the hardest part of the entire project. I actually spent a couple years thinking about paring that down on a piece of paper before I ever set out to build or design. And I was working from that list when I designed my house. How much space do I need to fit these things into a small space? And I think that when most people I've talked to, I know most people I've talked to say that when they've actually thought about it, they don't need nearly as much as they thought they did to be happy. And one thing that is true, most definitely true, is that things that aren't working for your happiness are definitely working against your happiness, because they're going to take all of the mortgage payment and the heat and the cooling and just eat up all that time that one could spend doing other things. Thank you.
All right, so let's just keep moving. We are arrived at the roof level, and thanks again for coming. Thanks to John and Piper for organizing it. I'm very flattered and honored to be part of this lineup. So thanks again for having this conference. What I would like to do this morning, I would like to take you on a tour to explore roofs as an elevated area that just wait to be landscaped. So what I want to do first is I want to talk to you first about what is a green roof. And it's not paint, and it's not the occasional moss that you might or might not see on your shed roofs. It really is a way of using the forgotten fifth facade of a building to challenge our conventional thinking and really use it for a function that can help us in many different ways. The reason why and in terms of how it can help us in different ways is really to incorporate the ecological or natural ecosystem function. You may remember that Governor Schweitzer was talking about this too, and then also yesterday Ralph from the National Land Trust was also referring to it, that you can actually make nature work for you without having to pay anything for that. And so with that, I wanted to explore again green roofs as an opportunity to first use as an innovative solution to deal with our stormwater runoff. I also want to use it as a way to add insulation to our buildings. Would like to use it as a way to lower our operating costs, because if we do increase our insulation and cut out the heat gain, especially now during the summer, we use a lot less energy to offset the heat gain with air conditioning. So they're very common sense kind of solutions, and no less just reduce our costs to do so. So as Montanians or Westerners, if you see a picture like this, you usually have if you hear the sound and you envision that that's kind of like a nice stream that you're maybe fly fishing. If you go to an urban area, that kind of sound that you might associate with a picture like this is quite different, because in Washington, D.C., we have combined sewer systems, and the amount of imperviousness, which amounts to or counts to about 75% in urban areas. With every single rain event, we have combined sewer overflow, and what you see on this picture is really a combined sewer overflow outlet that really brings all the bad things from everywhere around to our receiving streams, in that case, the Anacostia watershed or Anacostia River. Now, I want to take your attention to this picture for your orientation. Here's the Capitol, here's Washington Memorial, this is the Potomac River, and this is the Anacostia River. And you might notice a very clean line right here. What is that? It is basically an indication that in Washington, D.C., we have combined sewer overflow, or all the runoff from impervious surface areas being discharged into the Anacostia River, less than a mile away from the capital of the United States. And so there is some way to really think more about the impact of imperviousness in our areas on our receiving streams. And that may be an example from the East Coast, and originally being from Germany, you might think, girl, you're talking to the wrong audience. But not so, because as an example in the West, or also Pacific Northwest, Seattle and Portland have just put the salmon back on the endangered species list within city limits. So that means cities that have imperviousness of 75% and higher have to really think more creatively about stormwater management. That is, if you have impervious surface areas, not only do you have the runoff associated with it, but you also have usually dark surfaces that absorb a lot of heat in the summer. With every rain event, you have that runoff washed into the receiving streams, which creates an enormous thermal shock. And so salmon, your trouts in your streams right here, all are very temperature sensitive. And so to treat stormwater management or pre-treat stormwater management, stormwater runoff with a green roof or any other landscaped areas is a big, important issue. And so what happens in our urban areas? Again, I was just talking about the amount of impervious surface areas and the impact of the impervious surfaceness, not only on our streams and rivers, but also on our health costs. With increasing imperviousness, you have increasing heat, you have increasing runoff, you have better or worse air quality. You have concentrated stormwater that is being faster and faster and faster, and as it is being discharged into our streams, we see a lot of stream channel erosion, which again is a very big issue. And it's easier to deal with it up front than doing restorations later on, which is very expensive for communities. And so as you can see, what happens, we convert on a very high alarming basis landscaped area or forested areas, prairie land, into impervious surface areas. And in urban areas, about 30% of all imperviousness accounts for roofs. And so I'm not as naive to offer up green roofs as a solution to all the urban ills, but nevertheless, it's a way of really challenge our conventional thinking to use roof surfaces as an elevated way to landscape our urban areas and to beautify our urban landscapes. And what it requires is that we really understand our natural hydrological cycle. Now, if you're in a forest or if you're in prairie land, you have rain, it infiltrates into the ground, replenishes aquifers and things like this. Now, in urban areas, you can see that picture really changes quite dramatically. You have about 15% of evapotranspiration only because there are very few landscaped areas that actually allow infiltration, and with that plants to actually do transpire and evaporate it. And so about a staggering amount of 75% really does become urban runoff. And that's a problem. And so in terms of, how do we deal with it? Right now, we just put signs up, as you have seen throughout the conference. There are a lot of things that are after the fact kind of warning signs, like the pesticide in your front lawn. This is a sign warning sewage, avoid contact with river water after the rain. And I think we really can do much better than that. And so again, if you look at green roofs as a way to do that, it's not just that urban areas face those kinds of issues, but also here in the West, when we talk about especially second home development, you have the very same issues. You have a lot of land that is being transferred from natural cover to impervious cover. And again, with that comes all the things that we talked about: more runoff, accelerated runoff, stream channel erosion, urban heat island, health issues, and things like that. And so when we look at the opportunity of doing green roofs, we also have to be honest to each other and think, well, is this economical? And so what we need to do is we really need to do balancing of a few different things. And first of all, it is just looking at what do you want it to be, and Let me see. So we have to figure out what is this green roof supposed to do. We have a host of different benefits that green roofs provide because, first of all, again, they do absorb some of the rainwater when it falls onto it. It also provides a protective layer for the heat gain or the UV actually to even reach the roof surface, and with that you basically reduce the higher fluctuations of temperature with the green roof itself, and also what you can do is you basically extend the roof life of the waterproofing membrane because again it's a protective liner, and so. You can also use green roofs for education, and I show you a few things. You can use it for energy efficiency, again, based on all of those things with using the evapotranspirative, the cooling. And so what you have to do if you look at the economics of green roofs, you really have to focus first and define what this green roof needs to do for you. And before I go any further, I should probably say that I use mostly green roofs that are just very thin in profile. I call them thin profile green roofs, also mostly referred to as extensive green roofs. And basically it's somewhere between 2.5 to 4 inches of lightweight aggregate, and then planted with plant materials that are adapted to that environment that you create. And so it is really just barely a very small thin layer that does all the work. But again, there are different ways to make them work for you, and so you have to first find out what that actually the first thing is that you want this to perform to streamline your design process and then make it work. And so first, cost is always a very big issue. Now my work is mostly with commercial clients who have to comply with very strict stormwater regulations in the Mid-Atlantic area or also in the Midwest area where I used to live. And so that is stormwater management, quality control, and quantity control are a very big issue because we have receiving streams that have been polluted with non-point source pollution like nitrogen, phosphorus, and excessive heat and sediments for too long and really need to be taken care of. And so the thin profile green roof really usually proves as one of the most effective ways to address the regulations because the stormwater quality control requires only that you capture the first ½ inch because it is the most frequently recurring rain event and because it usually carries most of the non-point source pollution that have accumulated on impervious surface areas. And so by using just 2.5 to 3 inches of soil, you can provide ½ to 1 inch of water storage on your roofs. And so if you are, for instance, would like to use a green roof more for access and usability, then you have to have a whole different set of design principles because then if you want to use it, you have live load access, meaning us people. And so as soon as you add people to it, it becomes more of a structural issue because so far the thin profile green roof only it takes about 12 to 15 pounds per square foot that's added to your snow and wind load. And if you add people to it, if you want to make it more of an congregated space or something like this, then you have to add 100 pounds per square foot. And so there is a considerable financial difference and also liability difference that some people forget beforehand. But so it's very important to understand the anticipated use before you even start. And then working with plants, there's always maintenance and care, as we have heard from Fritz earlier today. And so quickly again, here's a graph that just shows rain events in numbers by intensity. This one represents storms that are less than ½ an inch, storms that are ½ inch to 1 inch, and then here are storms in terms of actual events greater than 1 inch. And you can see clearly that most of the rain events comes in small intensities. Now here in Missoula you get about 14 inches of rain per year, or to be precise 13.7. In Washington DC we get about 35 or 36 inches on an annual average basis. But again, the difference is not so much the actual amount, but really in what kind of intensity it comes down. And if you can focus on the small rain events and make the green roof work for that, you can basically capture 95% of all the rain that falls onto it, which then in the end cuts out the water that is being concentrated from one impervious surface area to another impervious surface area to another impervious surface area, but just stays right there at the source where it falls, and you don't even have to build a conveyance system that deals with it later on. And so if you have a chance to look at a book that is called Sustainable Landscape Construction, there is a reference in there that is very clear. It says, every gallon of water that you can keep on site saves you $2 of construction costs downstreams. Now that's pretty significant if you consider that most of the development budgets, half of those are being taken up or consumed by infrastructure management or infrastructure planning. That includes stormwater and also wastewater and streets. However, if you can really narrow down the infrastructure costs that you need to convey this kind of water that could stay on site and be used and recycled and actually make our urban areas much more prettier, then it becomes very economical. And you know, we also talked about research and data necessary. When you work with green roofs, there are a few things that are very common sense. And I think if you can see at this model here, you have one side there is nothing, it's just like a bare surface, and you have one side that is planted. It's just providing a bucket with a hole in the bottom, and then you have one plant pot filled with soil, and you give a 3-year-old a can of water, and it doesn't take a lot of science to figure out that the bucket with a hole in it drains out immediately, whereas the plant pot with soil and plants in it, it takes a long time before it filters through, and then eventually, if at all, actually drains out in the bottom. And so there is a lot of, I wouldn't say anymore, there is some anxiety about green roofs, but it actually has come down quite dramatically. Now I live in the United States for 15 years, and when I came and started talking about green roofs, people thought I was a little kooky. But now for 5 years we have annual green roof conferences that have had between 500 to 900 participants. So it's a rapidly growing industry, not so much only in interest, but really in a way of using our natural environments, making them nicer, and actually creating some jobs along the way. So it's very positive. And but you know, maybe again with 13.7 inches of rain, annual rain events, you might think, well, stormwater management just ain't such big of a deal here. But there are other incentives that you can use green roofs for, and I just wanted to show you a few projects, some of which I have been involved with, some of which I just show as examples that give you some other incentives to do. Now this one here is the Montgomery Park Business Center. It's in Baltimore, Maryland. And by the way, if you care for green roof design and want to participate in the next annual conference, it is in Baltimore next year in May. But the Montgomery Park Business Center is a 5.3 million square foot building. And the developer who developed it had a problem with filling this kinds of space. And it was during the time where he was planning the redevelopment that the Maryland Department of the Environment had for the first time put out a procurement process for bids that required new office space to consolidate Maryland Department of the Environment on basis of a lease that is very sustainable, including energy and access to natural lighting, things like that. And so for the developer, it was really important to get Maryland Department of the Environment into the building as a first anchor tenant, having 1.3 million square foot to lease, and having one potential tenant that would take up about half of this space. And so for him, adding a green roof was absolutely minuscule in terms of investment, but for him it meant cash flow of having somebody in there that really can fill half of the space. So again, with that, I want you to maybe just divert a little bit from the first cost type of thinking, because there are many different innovative ways to make it work cost effectively on an first cost basis. Now, City of Chicago is not one of my projects, but this is just the building itself. It's a 12-story building, center of Chicago, and you can see a green roof being on part of the building. The other part of the building back here is actually Cook County. And what they did is, Cook County did not want to have a green roof applied to their site, and so it's becoming actually a very nice way of monitoring impervious surface areas in terms of their impact on temperature and runoff and all of that, versus the green roof on the other side. I've just finished a project of 0.5 acres of green roof at the National Institutes of Health and at their new visitor center, and the reason for the National Institute of Health to do or pursue green roofs was solely for stormwater management. If you have ever been at Bethesda, the NIH campus is vast. There are tons of buildings out there, and they really wanted to minimize the impact of the new visitor center in terms of imperviousness. And again, stormwater quality and stormwater quantity control is quite expensive. And what my services as a consulting firm is basically, as an engineer, is I try to help my clients go through the permitting process to use green roofs as a means to meet those stormwater regulations in lieu of conventional engineering systems. So not only do you meet all your regulatory requirements, but you also gain so much more in terms of prestige and education and energy efficiency and things like this. It's just that stormwater was the focus of it, and that was the designing intent. But there are many different ways to make things work, and quickly, few education processes. As we've talked about so many things, education is something that should start very early. So some implications, just those bike stands, are a very simple thing to actually demonstrate something, that it is not very odd to have something grow on a roof. And then here at Harvard, one of my most exciting projects actually over the last couple of years with my students at the Graduate School of Design. I teach there, and when I was invited to teach a full course on green roofs, which was the first one in the nation in any university, I walked in this building, which is where all the architects and urban designers and landscape architects sit. And it's a building which has those gravel ballasted terraces, roof terraces, and I said, I'm not teaching this course without greening this roof. And so even the facilities manager from this building was quite impressed that within starting to teach this course in February until April, was like 3 months, we had from conception to actual installation of a building at Harvard. So that's something that he had never seen. But at the end of the semester, part of the curriculum, I had actually implemented that all of my students will be on the roof for various reasons, not only to provide free labor, but if you get onto the roof in the first place, you understand and you experience the roof environment, which is usually a lot harsher than you've ever experienced on the ground. It's usually a lot hotter, it's usually a lot more windy, there is no water available, and usually no shade. And so you actually get an appreciation for the plants that are supposed to grow there. And so I have to say, no, just hold your applause, please, because I don't want you to. I don't want to mislead you. This is just the work of a very talented graphic designer. However, our intent is that this roof is going to look like this in a few years. And here's what it really looks like. So just to briefly explain what we did is you saw gravel ballasted roof. And so we had 3 pilot programs going on. We used sedum, like succulent plants that grow in those kinds of environments, and we spread just sedum cuttings into the plain gravel itself and tried to see how they do. Then one of the trays, we did use a little bit of a compost amendment to just very, very, very sparsely amend the gravel with the compost, and then through sedum cuttings into it, and then the third part would be using lightweight aggregate and then spreading it out and then spreading sedum cuttings onto it. And so after 1 year, you could see that in each one of them, plants were actually alive, and it's just a matter of time for them to grow. Now, as I said, it's a very hostile environment, and here you can maybe detect a few red dots that actually, indicate that there are plants on there. Again, like very small plants. They have been fallen between the nooks and crevices of the gravel itself, but over 5 years, hopefully, it will really plan out. And this spring, I had a much smaller group of students, and we just repeated it, but we looked at the results from last year and only repeated the green roof with the lightweight aggregate amended kind of soil and spread sedum cuttings onto it. But it's basically also an idea that it doesn't need to cost a lot of money. One of my very basic principles as a designer or as a consultant is that I believe that my clients don't have to bleed out of their nose in order to get a green roof. Now, this one here was an investment of $1 a square foot or less than that. Now, I understand that you have to be patient and you don't get the instant impact of it, but nevertheless, it's something that you can do on a very small cost basis. Energy efficiency, as I mentioned before, is one of the primary reasons. This is my house right here in Washington, D.C. It's a row house. It's about 770 square feet, 2 stories. And I will never have the benefit of actually looking at and enjoying it, except if I come out through this roof access hatch. But the heat gain in the summer in Washington, D.C. was absolutely excruciating. And not liking air conditioning, but just rather a ceiling fan, I really wanting to just cut out the heat gain that you get through a regular black roof. And that was my way of doing it. And we just installed it in April this year. And that's how it looks like right now after 10 years. And that's my 5-year-old son, avid soccer player. And I can only say the best thing for education is really to indoctrinate your own children from a very early age. Aesthetics is another reason why people might want to engage in green roofs, and this just gives you a few ideas of the different texture and color that's available. Now, 3.5 inches of soil or 2.5 inches of soil doesn't really allow you a lot of diversity of plants, but as you can see, there is still enough to actually make it work and to make it worthwhile. Backyard habitat. We haven't really talked about wildlife corridors, but on the Pacific Northwest and on the East Coast, and even here you are within a migrating pattern or migrating corridor. And so, just inviting not just people back to the inner urban areas, but also wildlife is something that is very rewarding to see. And there are ways for us to learn from history. Again, I am from Germany, and the reasons why I initially got interested in green roofs is mostly the having grown up around not sod roofs, but that you build with thatch roofs, thanks. And so there is a very aesthetic and very calming kind of element of it that just got me into it. And as a civil and environmental engineer, I've just quickly become learned about or have come to appreciate the actual benefits that green roofs can provide. And so it's not a new technology, and as we have talked about so many times during this conference, time and again, we can actually just look back and remember the things that were done mechanical HVAC system. So, it has been used long time ago for cooling, naturally cooling, and keeping out the elements in places like Alaska, Scandinavia, and places like this. So it's something that has been really common sense, and even in this area, homesteaders have built most of their first houses with sod. And so, again, if you look at green roofs as a way to maybe challenge our conventional thinking and to adapt some of the examples from history that we know to our more urban environments now, there is a way to do that. Because it protects our roofs, it shades the building, it prevents the heat exchange with the interior, summer or winter. It's more that in the summer you get the evaporative cooling. In the winter you have more of a mass that actually cuts down the heat exchange with the inside of the of the air. But as we talk about urban heat island effect, it really is also something that not only cools our interior, but also reduces the surface temperature of the impervious surface areas themselves, and no less it absorbs and filters and recycles water and really addresses the problem before it actually becomes a problem. And now I just wanting to briefly go through a few things like soil and plants to give you a few ideas how to do this. But before I do this, I want you to know that every decision that you make along the way will have their consequences on maintenance and care. So if you have a different aesthetic that you want to choose different kind of plant material, you have something to worry about at the end of the installed project. Do you need to do irrigation? Do you have some load restrictions? Things like this. And if you're a school and want to do this as an experiment, you have to ask yourself, or even as a county building, you have to ask yourself if it's an experiment, success or failure, we learn from it, but is failure acceptable? And so with that, just a few words of soil. You can see there is a whole different way of using different kinds of materials for a green roof. Most of it is really guided by weight restriction, and so if you either use regular topsoil or gravel, that's about 10 pounds a square foot per inch thickness. So if you think about 3.5 to 4 inches of depth, you're talking 40 pounds per square foot. Now, if you want to manipulate that weight that you add to it, you can actually manipulate the type of material that you choose, like a lightweight aggregate, and mix in some sand and some pumice. You might have some access to it, some lava rock, anything that's locally available. Now, I use mostly expanded lightweight aggregate like shale or slate because it's readily available on the East Coast. And I usually use a lot of mushroom compost because we have a lot of mushroom growers on the East Coast as well. But it doesn't mean that these are the things that you need to use. You really have to look at your own natural resources right here in your backyard to make it most cost effective. And also a few words to plants. There is a big push for native plant material, and I solidly support that. However, for green roofs, it has a whole different concept. Again, if you stand on top of a roof, you experience this different climate, and that's really true that native plants to a geographic area are not necessarily the most suitable plants for a rooftop. So again, if you have a roof that has a water barrier underneath it, and there is no way for 7-foot root systems to go into reaching into some lower leaking or lower laying aquifers, you have to think about the type of plants that you use. And so most of the plants that I use are succulents that really have the tendency to spread out without growing high, but really store the water in their leaf systems so that they can sustain themselves without drought. Within a drought, a longer period of time. Now here again, with 13 inches of rain on an annual basis, you might wanting to think of a drip irrigation system just to have enough water to get them going in the very beginning. And just a few other things, sun, shade pattern. In shade you usually retain more moisture level in the soil, and so you have to be aware of that. And this picture is here a plant plug kind of installed green roof, like you saw here. These are plant plugs right here. So they have an established root system, and you put them in and they start growing right away. And here up front you have a parcel where we just use sedum cuttings like I did at Harvard University. So again, they are cheaper, but there is a consequence to that, and you have to be okay with that. Maintenance, you're all farmers, so I guess there is none. You just put your goats on top of it. But on a more serious note, if you install a green roof, going from here, from a freshly installed green roof to this one right here at Montgomery Park, you have to have some care and maintenance to include it, because you have to, as long as soil is exposed, you have to take out weeds to eliminate those aggressive plants that might shade out and take all the resources away from those that you need. You need to water it if you don't have enough natural precipitation, and you need to fertilize it about once a year with a slow release fertilizer. But just as, take a look outside of your offices and your homes and things like this, I think we have great potential for green roofs. And even if you sit in Boston on an airport, you stare out on this roof, which would be could be quite pleasant. But again, there are many opportunities, like shopping malls and shopping centers, just to really reduce the impact of imperviousness on our streams and watersheds and everything else. And with that, I don't have any time to talk about LEED. I just say I was really impressed by Josh on Friday saying that they had the courage to jump off the USDA organic certified wagon. And if people are serious about green roof, you might want to have the courage or take the courage to jump off the LEED wagon, because if you have a choice of doing a green roof or to exchange incandescent lights with fluorescent lights, it's a no-brainer. The green roof goes, because you have a greater impact, a greater effort to do that. And so I leave it at that. And so I just wanted to say you can always start small as good news. And, there is the message that Fritz also brought is that the reason why I like green roofs so much is that you really have an option and a choice to really do work on a very individual basis, which is very rewarding. But obviously, the greater benefits come on a regional application. And so with that, I just ask, so why do we do green roofs? Because people will look, and we should make it worth their while. And since we are in farmland, I also wanting to say, why green roofs? Because we make our animals much happier. This one is a big chicken farm in Germany under a green roof. And so I leave you with that. Piper, do we have questions? Okay, we do have 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, I really applaud what you're doing. I've actually built a green roof on a garage office combination in climate very similar to what we have here, very dry in Cascade Mountains in Washington State, but on the east side of the Cascade Mountains. And also my relatives come from Norway, and a green roof is not a novelty, it's traditional, and they really work. You have to plan right, however, for how you put the membrane underneath and how do you keep the plants going. But the roof that we built in Washington State is still going strong. We had to build strong underneath it, but I think we did a pretty good job with very little knowledge, and requires almost zero maintenance.
That's great.
And you have a lot of potential in Missoula for those.
No, there is. And actually, I just wanted to say quickly, since I didn't talk about waterproofing, the one difference to a regular roof is within green roof is that you need to have a layer that prevents roots from growing through. And there are two kinds of roofs. One would be the build-up roofs or any tar or asphalt-based roofs that are basically organic products, and so roots grow right through it, as you can see, sometimes plants growing through a parking lot. And then the other part of the roofing industry is, it's called a single-ply roofing membrane, which is either an EPDM or a rubber liner, pond liner, you have heard of that, or PVC. And either one of those would work as your primary waterproofing as well as root barrier. Whereas for the shingle roofs, you would have to provide, or you have to put down a plastic liner to prevent roots from growing through. I just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine, for a very nice presentation. My question is about extreme events. In some climates you get 15 inches of rain per day, and you also have high wind. How will these roofs hold under such circumstances?
Very interesting question. Again, the place that I know best is the Mid-Atlantic region, and so we have our distribution of rain pretty much evenly throughout the year. But we would never design a green roof for a 100-year storm event. So it's always just designed for stormwater for the first half inch. And so I only want to use green roofs as the first tier of a treatment train that would then kind of like trickle down and again reduce infrastructure costs. So in an area where you have, like here also, where you have severe droughts in the summer and no rain when you need it the most, it is very difficult to argue for stormwater management, but you could still use a drip irrigation system, as I mentioned, and really use the green roof primarily for energy efficiency rather than for stormwater management. But you could, in places where you have then no rain in one time and then torrential rains in another time, again, first of all, load comes to mind that you have to account for that, and then you either could catch it in some other ways. But one of the most important things or characteristics of a green roof is that it takes a long time or a while to actually reach this absorption capacity, and then it starts running down. Now, as an engineer with a green roof on my own house, I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning when I hear it's raining and just marvel that my downspout is just trickling out, whereas everybody else's goes shh, and so. But you can, there is a way to capture some of the additional runoff, but that may not be the most economical use for it really to design it for.
But I guess my question is even simpler. Will I have a green roof after such an event? Or will it be gone and I will have to?
No, I would really recommend that you would put a drip irrigation system in, and you can use your gray water to pump it up with a very small pump, that you use from showering or something like this, and then irrigate it during the time very minimally, but that it doesn't starve to death.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed in some of the pictures, some of the buildings had a pretty steep roof pitch. I'm wondering if there's certain kind of framework that you need to put into your design to keep things from eroding.
Very interesting question too, and 30 minutes talking about green roofs is pretty excruciating for you because I can't really pack everything into it. But here in the West you have pretty steep slopes because it's an architectural design element to shed off the elements. If you have, but you also still have a lot of relatively flat roofs or low sloped roofs, and those obviously the low sloped roofs are much more efficient for stormwater management because you actually have some capacity to store it. Now, the steeper the slope goes, the faster the gravity actually pulls it down, and the fewer retention capacity you have. And it's also a little bit, in terms of construction, it's a little bit more difficult to do sloped roofs. I've done sloped roofs up to 40 degrees, and what you need to do is basically to break the shear force of all the material to otherwise slide down. You would just put in a grid system of untreated wood in smaller fields, so you basically create smaller fields where the soil lies in, and then the plants starting to grow, and as they grow they really form absolutely dense root systems, and so you only need this shear force protection in the first couple of years until the plants really take root. For some of the pictures that I showed that are 60 degrees in slope, you have to bolt it to the actual building itself, so that becomes a little bit more maintenance intense and more expensive because there is nothing that would hold it otherwise in place. All right, yeah, thank you very much.